Morning everybody from GLAMIS North, Nick Olson. We're here doing a demo ride on the brand new 2022 RZR PROR and Turbo R. Let's go check them out.
The good news is belt durability is quite phenomenal. It's actually most of the time the failure can get the same guy said the Polaris there, they brought a camera. I said, how can follow the driver? It's all pretty cool. I don't think we've ever met. Nick. Field test. Yeah.
Look at these radius rods, Travis. Everything's more bigger. How are you?
Not too bad, Nick. How you doing?
Good, man.
The full bed mount is up higher for the engine, so the box is shorter.
Yeah, box is 4 inches shallower
Oh, then previous.
than a Pro XP.
Okay, just for room.
Yeah, for the engine underneath it.
Mhm.
I mean, it looks the same until you get up to it. It's shallower.
Holy cow.
Yeah, someone was asking what the tube thickness was on or wall thickness was on the cage. I don't remember what it was. Pat would know.
This is just significantly bigger than anything.
Yeah.
Rider compartment the same? Door is the same?
Everything on the cab is the same.
Mhm.
This whole area, wherever anything you can touch, is the same from a aesthetic standpoint. But of course,
size.
Underneath it's all different. But
Mhm.
plastics are all the same on the cockpit.
So a guy jumps in this with a blindfold versus a Pro XP.
You wouldn't feel
Turbo R, same, everything.
Shifter is different because it's a little different shape to it, the
Mhm.
angle of it, but you wouldn't notice a difference. Turbo R, Pro XP, all the same.
Yeah.
Seats are identical.
Are the Travis, Coyne, we're here, first winner, first ride. We have 5 different vehicles. We're getting to drive the 2-seat and 4-seat, Pro and Turbo. Which one did you start off with?
I was in the 4-seat Turbo R. Super impressive, guys. I've had the privilege over my racing career to drive some of the best equipment, Pro 2s, Pro 4s, trophy trucks. This thing is a race car out of the gate, let me tell you. The motor is really impressive in a stock form, and I can't wait till the aftermarket guys get a hold of it, because I think we truly have something special here.
Yeah, I started off in the 4-seat, the big boy, the Pro R, and the power feels very linear. So you're going faster when you look at the speedometer than it feels like compared to a 2-cylinder.
Yeah, because it's not working as hard. So you have that same feeling like in trophy trucks or high-end pre-runners. The vehicle's really not working hard, so you're able to carry more speed and travel faster without stressing the drivetrain, the vehicle, and even sometimes yourself, because you're just cruising, clipping along at a great pace.
All right, so Travis, one of the things I noticed, the chassis feels very rigid and stiff. It's a bigger, heavier vehicle than most UTVs. Like you said, you had a lot of experience with pre-runners. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, you know what, this is a big car, and generally in off-road, big cars are good. So it's got a little bit more weight than average. It's got a bigger feel to it. It feels a little heavier in the steering. Really impressive.
Oh my lord. Power, predictable, and instantaneous.
Smooth.
And strong. Just unbelievably strong. PROR. Holy
You probably didn't even feel the whoops on this big girl, huh? You were just probably...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The deeper they were, the better it went.
Todd, what do you think?
Amazing. Super strong down low. Acceleration is instantaneous. Handling of the machine is amazing though. The deeper, the rougher it is, the smoother it works, and the tractability is amazing. Total thumbs up for Polaris.
Well, I just hopped out of the Pro R 2-seater, Travis.
What do you think?
I noticed We're going through a fast wash, and it's pretty cool. They're letting us run multiple different lines, which is really nice, you know, letting us have a little freedom and get out of the dust and have some fun. And
Yeah.
that car does not sign off. Like, I gotta, you know,
Got power all the way through.
65 and just keep pulling.
Yeah, same with this 4-seater. The longer wheelbase, you know, makes it fun to, even though it's long, you can still throw it around. I was throwing it in pretty hard in the wash back there, and doesn't want to step out on you. And that motor, so smooth, so drivable.
Super stable
Yeah,
and predictable.
predictable.
I think it's very predictable.
Almost too predictable for the average Joe to jump in this thing, right?
When you look at the speedo.
Yeah, when you look how fast you really get going, how easy it is to get there. I've been lucky enough over the years to drive some pretty cool vehicles and high-end off-road toys, and this car is cool. It feels big, it feels stable, but it's still light and nimble at the same time. My favorite car by far is going to have to be the PROR. That motor is amazing. It's smooth, linear power. You can get on it, the power's there where you need to, and it just doesn't stop pulling. The Turbo R, great car. It's a great upgrade for the Turbo S. You know, we've seen the motor before, we know the platform. Bolted in this new chassis, a new drivetrain, and they did a pretty amazing job at a pretty good price point.
Yeah, Travis, I felt like I started off in the Pro R 4-seater, and they said with the 4-seaters now, they're springing them a little stiffer to compensate for 4 vehicles, accessories, which is smart because you see it all the time. A lot of guys, they start loading them down. People in the vehicle is much lower, and it's kind of undersprung already.
Yeah, so I kind of noticed that in the washes and through some of the chatter bumps or braking bumps going into the turns. But yeah, average guys, yeah, either for Baja, they're loaded down anyways. Most families out on the weekends have 4 people in them anyways, so I think it was smart on Polaris' behalf to think ahead and spring them a little bit taller or stiffer.
I think we need to double our order.
We could.
I think we need to double the order is what we need to do.
Todd, you drove all the vehicles. You're a longtime desert rat, dirt bike guy, off-roader.
Yep.
What'd you think?
Most amazing production side-by-side I've ever driven. The Pro R in both applications, 2-seat, 4-seat, amazing power delivery, handling spot on. The nastier the conditions, the suspension was amazing. So very well balanced, very predictable, and just unbelievable power out of the Pro R.
It's funny you said predictable. That's kind of the word that I kept thinking of.
Yeah.
When the back end breaks loose on all of them, it does so very predictably. The power is very smooth and linear, usable.
Right.
Todd's a dirt bike guy. I'm a pseudo washed up dirt bike guy, but it's like a bigger, heavier 450. Like the Pro R is so stable.
Right.
It feels flatter. It feels like less things are going to come out and potentially bite you. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you think about it?
So the tractability, and here's the moto side of things. You know, when you're accelerating coming out of corners, that's where you make up corner time. That's where you make up speed on the track. And the Pro R, the tractability coming out of any type of gnarly, rough conditions, it just absorbed and hooked up. And it was true track. Was not squirrely, did not get out of shape at all, and just hold on for the power delivery.
I think Polaris did a great job mapping out a good course. Call it course. You know, I had lots of varied terrain. The washes are always fun to get into, and yeah, the car feels very stable and very planted. So I think it's going to be a great all-around car. It's going to be a great Baja car. Obviously, a sand dune car with that power. And like I said, I can't say enough about the Pro R motor. Super impressed, and yeah, hats off to Pat and his whole team that brought this thing to life.
So again, 3 pillars we're going to talk about: power, strength, and control. We'll start on the power side of this. So obviously that starts in the back end with this beautiful ProStar Fury 2-liter engine. So kind of some of the same hallmarks that we've had on many ProStars for the last few years. So it's a dual overhead cam motor, 4 valve per cylinder. Cylinder bore sizing and stroke are actually similar to what an XP1000 has. So 93 millimeter bore size, 73.5 millimeter stroke. Multiply that by 4, you get 1997 cc's, i.e. 2-liter engine. Interesting thing here, right? The engine's actually turned, so it's a north-south crank on this, so it runs front to back. It's not side to side like most razors have been. And we've had some questions on, you know, what's different between a Slingshot 4-cylinder and the RZR 4-cylinder. Now they do share like the big castings, so the block, the bed plate, and the head are the same, but beyond that, they're basically 2 different engines. So as we look, intake and exhaust, completely different for the RZR application. So you can see the exhaust is on the hot side or the driver's side. It's a 4-into-2-into-1 exhaust. Center outlet in the back. Spark arrestor is built right into the exhaust tip. On the intake side, we've got a single 62mm contour bore throttle body. So the nice part about that is we actually get really good idle stability, but because it's not just a round butterfly, it's actually shaped. As that opens, we can give you that nice acceleration you guys felt. Hopefully you got a chance to play with those different throttle modes while you were out riding and experience the difference between the sport, rock, and race. What the nice part is we can give you really nice slow speed control, but we can open it up and give you that real nice high speed performance as well. At the bottom end of the motor, we've got a lightweight. Oh,
3 different settings. That's more than just throttle.
It is, so it actually works as a torque demand. So it's not just exactly how the throttle changes, but the 3 on the dash are really how the throttle pedal interacts with the engine. The ones on the steering wheel are suspension and steering. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So you got air coming in, going through the air box, right down to the throttle body, into the motor. Still, you know, 1 injector, 1 spark plug per hole, coil on plug, so 4 ignition coils right on the top of the motor here. You can see the oil fill port right in the top of the valve cover, so that's super easy to get to. And much like the Pro XP, this one's got a vented head, so you can see there's a coolant line actually coming right out of the top of the valve cover. So this thing actually will self-purge really well. And it also doesn't heat soak so bad, because when the engine's off, that heat can come up and travel out that center coolant port. So you don't get, you know, running hard in the dunes like on a Turbo S. You might get somebody that's running, they pull out, park on the top of a dune, and that coolant temp, you know, when you shut off, will crank up. On these, that doesn't really happen, much like a Pro XP. Usually you won't see much over about 230, even on a really hot day when you've been riding hard. And the instant you start it back up, it's flowing and comes right back down to temp. So it's really nice in that regard.
Hey Pat, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
A non-turbo motor, what are your operating temps like compared to a turbo model, you'd say?
About the same, yeah.
Okay.
So you're in that 200 to 210 range is pretty standard if you're looking at your coolant temp.
And 230s on the warm side like a turbo?
Yeah, same thing. When you get up that 230, 235 range is when you start getting to the over temp, when your light pops on. And then if you go way up, which I don't know that I've ever seen anyone actually do on a Pro R, it will protect and shut the engine down when you get up in that 250 range. So nice thing here, we got a hot side of the engine, we got a cold side of the engine. So on the cold side is kind of everything you'd want for service and access. So oil dipstick right here, easy to get to on the side. Oil filter, super simple to get to. You don't have to worry about draining oil on your motor anymore. Other things you'll see, the alternator on the back here. So a 1700 watt alternator, so you got plenty of power to be able to drive not only the vehicle loads, but also accessories. It is a belt-driven alternator under this cover, and it's a stretched belt, so you don't have to worry about an extra tensioner. The tension is in the belt, basically. Coming back, you can see the starter motor right here in the back as well, on the side of the motor. So solenoids mounted right on the starter motor. So pretty simple, easy to access operation there. And then we've got a stacked oil plate cooler here. So this has actually got more stacks in it than the slingshot application for the off-road on RZR. And we run about a 10-degree cooler thermostat as well on RZR versus what we've got on Slingshot. So there are some differences, I'll say, on the top end of the engine. And then when you get to the bottom, the oiling system is completely different. So we actually have a scavenged oil system that's set up for high angularity for the off-road application, so that we can always keep that oil sump in oil even when you're going up, you know, down or getting to different angles. The RZR engine's really designed to be able to withstand that for the off-road. As we keep going forward, single fuel line feeds the rail. There's not a return line on this one, so you don't have to worry about any fuel coming back. 12 to 13 gallon tank, depending on whether you got a 2 or a 4 seat. Obviously you can see the fuel tank here sitting right under the passenger side seat. What you can't see is down in the fuel tank, there is a fuel well at the bottom of the pump, so that helps keep fuel in the inlet of that pump so it stays primed quite well. So you can really run it, you know, almost down to nothing, even when you're off-roading. Coming off the front of the motor, there's actually an adapter. So again, I mentioned, you know, bottom end of the engine, right, is a little bit different. We've got a lightweight crank that really allows it to rev real fast. You guys probably noticed that, especially when you flip that switch into race mode, that it was like wanting to go now. Yeah, exactly. And because we got the seats out, we actually popped the clutch cover off this unit, so you guys could see the new clutches and belt on this setup. The one thing I will tell you is that we've got, oops, sorry, I dropped a hose there. This cover is actually an old rev. The production one will look a little different. Basically the top 5, so which way does it go here? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 5 will actually be a bolt and a nut going through the cover, but the bottom ones that are the harder ones to access will have that easy toolless half turn system. So the nice thing is you pop the seats, pop the back panels, you got easy access to the clutches and belt. And when you look at this, everything's been sized up to be able to handle the 225 horse in this engine. So new primary clutch, new secondary clutch, and it's got a dual clutch inlet path. So if you look, the intake on this side actually flows right down, and you can see that we're flowing air kind of behind the clutch now. So we're actually like driving that air back to the backside of the stationary sheave on the primary. And then if you look at any of the hoods that are around us that have the bumped up, you'll see that the sides are open. This duct that runs down the center spine, along with that rubber piece that I dropped, basically flows into the outside of the secondary clutch. So we're feeding the air basically into the back side of both and into the front side of both, so we can keep that belt nice and cool, right? Because we want to transfer heat, belt to clutches, clutches to air, and then purge that air out the back side. The other one thing that you'll notice on these clutches that will change in production is that there will be some stainless inserts right where the buttons go on these towers. So this clutch doesn't have those in it yet, but they'll basically be kind of on either side of the tower on all 6 posts. And that basically just helps with the button life on that Spider. So that will be slightly different. Look at the weights, they're much wider. They are a bushed weight, so there's bushings on the pin where that weight pivots. We've got bigger rollers underneath that you can't necessarily see here. And the overall diameter of these clutches has grown from what we've had on previous models. So both the primary and secondary are physically larger. And we've also spaced the clutches out. So we used to have a 10.5-inch center distance, now it's 12. So we actually run a longer, slightly wider belt on this that's different than what we've had on previous turbo models. So I think some of the guys asked, you know, the 321-1202 is the belt number that you've been running since model year 17, I think, on turbos. This has now got a 1226 belt, so it's a new part number specific to the PROR. So when you guys think about what to stock in your shop, you know, you want to have a couple of those on the shelf. The other nice thing here is that the tool for spreading the secondary is built right into the inner clutch cover, so you don't have to worry about losing that out of your toolkit. It's just snapped in, ready to go. So when you pull the clutch cover, you've always got that guy to be able to thread in to spread that driven clutch. So
the driven looks almost the same, just bigger. Is it essentially the same exact design?
It's a similar design. So the previous one was also baffled on the backside, but yeah, it's a grown version of it. Obviously, it's got new tuning parts, so the helix is different for this application. But yeah, I'll say similar methodology. The airflow structure is way different on these. The overall size is different, and then on the primary, you know, adding those stainless sliders in is different that you don't see here, but they would be on, you know, the production rigs that are spread around us here.
One-piece frame, correct?
Yes, we will get there in just a minute or two, but you are 100% correct. One-piece mainframe.
You can get your
Polar.
Yeah, there's a slightly shorter puller for the primary to fit in this with that seat tube going down through there. But yeah, you can pull the clutch without taking any of that with it in there still. But this seat frame does unbolt if you did want to get it out of the way. It's not hard to pop out. People, because they're used to seeing a big clutch cover on the driver's side in the back here. Still a standard park reverse, neutral, low, high gear in the gearbox. But the one thing you will notice that's different is if you look at where the shift sector goes in here, that this is a different setup with the cable. So you can see we got 2 cables going into this, so it's a pull-pull cable system now instead of a push-pull. So our previous models all had like 1 cable, and the problem is when they hit that arm, it ends up being at a different angle. So between neutral, low, and reverse, you get like the same shift effort, but when you go into high or park, it's always a little harder because you're kind of off angle. The nice thing on this, and you guys probably noticed it while you were driving, it's the same effort to shift between any gear. You know, and you'll tend to, it feels a little bit different because it's got this pull-pull cable versus the single push-pull. But once you get used to it, you tend to hit the gear you want every time because it's a consistent force across all of them. Upgrades in the transmission, the gear faces are bigger to be able to handle the bigger power. And the other difference you see coming out of that transmission is that there's a drive shaft going to the back and a prop shaft going up to the front. So the short drive shaft in the back, you know, it's only about this long. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it from that side or not. It's, yeah, I'll get out of your way, but it's this guy right down here.
Yep.
So that goes back to the separate rear drive, which is unique to the PROR. It's a brand new rear gear case. That guy's a lock spool, so it's spinning both wheels at the same time, just like any other RZR. It's just accomplished with a 90-degree box in the back. And then when you look coming out at the half shafts, they're obviously wider to handle the 74-inch width of this vehicle. But we've upgraded the bar diameter. We've gone to stronger CVs, so the joints are actually bigger. They do slide a little internal. And we've gone to a higher temp grease inside the CVs as well to be able to handle the power on these machines. So again, when you think about power, right, 225 horse, it's got a really nice broad torque band on this engine, which you guys felt probably while you were out doing your driving and demos. Torque peaks around 7,500 RPM, so it's kind of in that sweet spot of where you're operating most of the time. And we peak around 152, 153 foot-pounds of torque, so it's way higher than what the turbo vehicles have been in the past. And that's really why you get that great kind of mid-range performance out of these with that instant on throttle.
Indicator or anything to indicate
So,
the difference? Or?
Yes and no. I'm not sure on the vintage of when all the machines were built you were riding, but because our LCD here is like fixed segment, like the little icon looks the same. So whether you're in open diff or locked, it will still have all four wheels like lit up on that. And if you're in two wheel, like it'll be just the rears. And when you change modes, it'll actually scroll text on the production rigs. I'm just not sure if these ones actually do that yet.
It's on the C4 gauge. Brakes that you'll get in those real quick moments are handled through that slipper clutch, if you will. It's basically like a clutch pack wet that at certain load will clip some of those and help protect your front end of your vehicle. So then that's all internal right to the front side of the, right where the output shaft is. So,
yeah, so that's built into the transmission. Thank you, Dave.
Questions? There's no teeth.
yeah, it's
like a wet plate
compression,
clutch
yeah,
on a motorcycle. So if you think like friction and steel plates stacked, it's just kind of shrunk down and I don't know, about that big, yay round. Right, basically right where the prop shaft comes out of the transmission. It's right behind there.
That's only to the front. The rear is live.
Full power to the rear all the time. Yeah.
There's some challenges making that all work with a big 4-cylinder that you had to work through. Is it?
It's a lot of power, man. A lot of power.
It comes down to, you know, weight management, honestly. You know, how much commonality or any type of system that you have designed. If we did not have that, you would have much larger components. And the reality is you don't notice it. There are instantaneous events that happen that can take it out, like in a cross-up situation or something. And you need all that mass and weight, you know, at all times. No.
So yeah, so as we continue on talking about strength, obviously chassis is a big part of that, roll cage one piece. When you come up and look at the front suspension, this is where it's easy to visually see, even on a fully, you know, put together machine, right? You can see just how big and beefy these A-arms are down in the bottom and the upper. But the nice part is with this shock now mounting to the lower arm, we're able to put a lot of the structure in the lower arm for the suspension load in the arm that you tend to run into stuff with, right? So when you think, you know, if you're gonna bump something on the trail, it's generally gonna be the lower arm, not the upper arm. So we can take some of the weight out, keep the weight lower down, and really optimize the design of these control arms as we go, you know, and keep them nice and strong. The other thing is you go out to the wheel end that's a little unique and different. It's kind of hard to see, but we have upgraded now to a 5-bolt hub on these models, so you can see that on the rim. But the hub now is a unitized hub bearing. So instead of having to clamp all the load for the wheel bearings through the half shaft, they're basically in a hub bearing assembly now that just bolts in, much like you'll find probably on most of the cars in the parking lot. And the nice part is you don't need crazy high axle torques anymore. You know, you're basically just holding that in place instead of clamping that whole joint together now. So that makes it a lot easier to service and work on. The other thing strength-wise that you see are, when you look through, you can actually see on the brakes that it's a 2-piece rotor design. So the outside where the brake pads actually clamp against is a steel portion. And when you look down at the inside, it's actually an aluminum top hat. So we call it kind of a top hat rotor. So we can take some of the weight out, but still get all the strength we need in the brake. And it pulls some of that unsprung mass out of the wheel end, which is kind of nice. And then from kind of the control side, when you look, we got nice big 3-piston calipers up front, duals in the rear, and that's common among PROR and TURBOR. So you guys probably found like the braking performance is really, really good on these things.
Super good.
Yeah, right now. Like right now, and the pedal's there exactly when you want it, no mush or anything. So it's really, really nice. Big upgrade on the brakes actually on these compared to previous RZRs that we've had out there.
And the 2-piece rotor is more about saving weight versus the braking, cooling, and performance?
Correct.
Wow.
Yep, correct. Yep, take some of the unsprung mass out of the wheel end, right, where you got, you know, you're already slinging around a big heavy tire and rims package, so, you know, and you can take some of that steel out. You know, you look at a truck, right, you got a rotor that's this big. Well, the only place you really need the steel is where the brake goes, but you end up, you know, making a 1-piece design, so this 2-piece helps take some of that weight out. The other thing from a strength perspective, we actually have, that you might not be aware of, we've actually integrated the power steering with the rack and pinion assembly now for the steering. So we can actually drop the power steering down low. We remove the lower steering shaft, and there's some other benefits I'll talk about in a little bit on the Dynamics DV side as well from this new power steering system. But it is a stronger setup, and we do actually allow you to service the tie rods now with these new packages, so you don't have to replace the whole steering rack assembly if you ever,
that's sweet,
bend a tie rod. You can, obviously you can replace tie rod ends. We've done that for years, but I believe that these tie rods are actually serviceable now as well, aren't they, Dave?
Yes. Yeah. You can.
Yeah. There's a holding tool you need
off.
so that you don't put the torque through the rack and pinion itself, but as long as you follow the service procedure, that can be done.
Now, if you flat spot the teeth on the steering rack, you have to buy power steering and steering rack.
It is one assembly, yep. I think they come as a pair in that regard.
Okay. I didn't hear this question, sorry.
Yeah.
If you put flat spots on the teeth and screw up the...
Yeah, you gotta buy a newer. There's no rack
with the
replacement.
power steering, everything.
Yeah, the motor, all that stuff.
You guys test bigger, heavier tires? You think a lot of guys are gonna run?
We do, yeah. So we, I'll say from the factory side, we come stock with a 32-inch Maxxis Rampage tire, which, ignore the fact that these are labeled something else. Just look at this one over here. That's also wrong. How about versus the Pro XP that was at 96, or a Turbo S that was at 90? So you got a lot more wheelbase to dampen those bumps as you go, and you guys probably felt that when you were out driving today for sure. Radius rods are upgraded and beefed up, and the other thing that's actually really easy to see in the back are the upgraded M14 or the 14mm fasteners. So you got bolts now that are, for you English guys, are bigger than 1/2 inch now, holding all your suspension joints. So think radius rods, both sides. You got them up in the control arms in the front, bolting on the trailing arms in the back. And the other thing that a lot of people ask us about is, what is this big red bar that's going through the trailing arm? And that's actually a toe link. So the cool thing is, so when you think about suspension, right, you got caster that's this way, you got camber that's this way, and toe is this. So what those bars are doing is actually through the suspension travel, they're keeping that toe basically pointed straight ahead, so you don't get wheel motion like this as you're going. And the nice thing is they're quite easy to adjust. If you got a full alignment rack, obviously use that. If not, you can string around the tires, but it's a pretty simple deal where you loosen up the bolt. You turn the bolt head, there's a concentric nut on there that will change the toe, and then you lock it back in place. So it's a super simple thing. Usually once it's done, from the factory, you won't have to worry about it, but if you ever change any of those components out, or you're working on service and you put it back together, like, you got to pay attention to reset that toe link so that you don't end up with, wheels that are towed out or towed in, or, something that's both pointing the same way, because you'll feel that at high speed operation, where the back end will kind of feel skittish on you if you get that misadjusted.
Do you recommend dead nuts straight, or do you do toe in?
I think the spec is straight, like plus or minus an 1/8 of an inch, something like that. Yeah.
Straight to essentially a little toe in.
Yeah.
You probably want to set it to maybe an 1/8. If you were to string it, about an 1/8 inch on the front of the tire.
Yeah. So talk power, we talk strength. Let's move on to control. So we talked about a little bit on suspension on just some of the parts. We talked about what that toe link does on the front end, right? We talked how that shock mounts down to the lower arm. Little bumps, so when you're going through chatter, all the way up to those big whoops that you guys were driving through. From a mechanical perspective, these shocks on the Ultimates are internal bypass shocks. I'll say usually the Southwest is the one part of the country that actually understands what a bypass shock is when I say that. But just for reference, the piston is inside a tube that's inside the outer body that you see here. And there's some holes drilled on that inside. Some have check valves, some don't, that allow oil to bypass that piston, so they can, the oil can flow around. Not everything has to flow through it. So what it allows us to do is at like kind of the little strokes near ride height, we can give you really smooth operation, and then when you start getting faster and bigger strokes, we can actually ramp that up as you go. So the key on internal bypass, whether it be a PROR or TURBOR, when you get a vehicle and you load it up with accessories, with people, with gear, and it starts to drop that ground clearance down, you actually want to crank preload back into the springs to get that ground clearance back, to get it in that nice plush ride zone. And if you don't do that, what you tend to find is guys will come back and complain that have like really loaded them up, that it's kind of harsh, it's not riding as good as when they had it, before they added all that weight. And really, you just got to get that ride height back to where it should be, and you'll be back in business. On the sports and premiums, if we walk down to this Turbo R, we can actually show you what shock those run. I think it's the only vehicle here that actually has them on other than Pete.
That one right there.
That one too? No, that's an Ultimate. Sorry. Yeah, that's okay. Same shock is used on Turbo R and Pro R. So
Longer shock stroke, Pat, than before?
It is, yeah, the shocks are longer. That is true, and they are different between a Turbo R and Pro R. But if you look, this is a velocity series, so if you look at those internal bypass, we end up with about 5 compressive zones as that shock goes up. So it keeps getting stiffer and stiffer and stiffer as you go past those bypass ports. On these velocity series, if you notice where this reservoir is, it's not all the way up at the top of the shock, it's actually slid down. And that's actually how these velocity series shocks work. So if you look at like those XP1000 rental rigs over there, those have needle shocks in them. So there's about a 2.5-inch needle at the top of the rear shock that points down, and the shock rod is actually hollow. So there's a tapered point on the end of the needle. As it goes up, it starts to constrict, and then it closes off that port, forces all the oil through the piston. And that really gives it the anti-bottoming and anti-kick. So it kind of works in both ways as that piston comes all the way to the top and then retracts. On these velocity series, you basically have the piston come up. Once it goes past this port, it closes off, and then it forces more oil through the piston, and then it has a needle at the top. So you end up getting like a 3-zone shock on these velocity series, which gives us nice performance out of the mechanical shock itself. A little bit better than like what you see on that XP1000, which only has 2 zones. But that's kind of the difference on how this velocity series operates versus the internal bypass, like without having them cut apart to be able to show you guys the insides. So any of you guys that are in service that have rebuilt shocks, you might have seen what they look like, but that's in a nutshell kind of how they work. And these two things operate independently. So there's times now where we're gonna take away both, add both, or move them in opposite directions. And there's competitive models on the market that have rebound and compression, but they're coupled together. So like if they add more rebound, they have to go down on compression or vice versa. They can't actually drive them both up or down at the same time. So the nice part about this, and I think you guys got to play around with it while you were driving, is your suspension modes are actually now not just comfort, sport, and firm like they were on a Pro XP or Turbo S, but they're actually a little more terrain specific, right? So you got comfort, track, rock, and Baja. So when you're in the comfort mode, I don't know if any of you guys were looking at your ride command display while you're in those suspension modes, but what you'll see we do is we actually drop compression and rebound basically all the way out of them, and what we're allowing that tire to do is just float over the terrain, right? Our goal is just to make those tires move as easy as possible, so when you're just slow cruising or coming back to camp, that's kind of that comfort mode when you want to use it. The other thing that we've got on this system is that we actually adapt the power steering assist as well to the suspension modes. So when you got Dynamics DV now, when you change those modes, it changes not only the shocks at all 4 corners, but the steering assist as well through the power steering. So in that comfort mode, you're going to get the easiest assist that we're going to have for most driving scenarios. And it's going to tend to give you a little, I'll say a little lighter feel of the front wheels. So it's going to tend to feel a little more understeer-like, kind of like a car or truck, where it's going to push a little more into the turns, and that's done kind of on purpose in that comfort mode. When you step up next then to the track setting, we're actually going to drop the ride height down on the vehicle by putting a little more rebound into it and up in the compression. And we're going to get more aggressive as you enter events like cornering. So if you look back to a Turbo S, when you like went into a corner, we would stiffen up the outside shocks and we'd leave the inside alone. When we went to Pro XP, we updated the software, so we'd add compression on the outside and we'd drop it on the inside. Well, now we actually do that here as well, and track mode is going to do it more aggressively. So it's going to sink the ride height down a little bit, and it's going to give you the most quick reacting when you're like going into corners to keep that body flat. So think of areas where you're running like higher speed gravel or kind of broad corners. Dunes actually works kind of well for track mode sometimes too if you're not in real rough stuff. Or if you get to like short course style racing, you know, where you want to be sunk down and you're really railing through turns, that track mode works really well. When you go up from there, rock is the next one. I forgot to mention the steering assist in that track mode, we actually reduced the assist a little bit, so you can get basically a more feedback from the front tires, so it's going to give you a more neutral steer feel. So you kind of feel a little more connected to the front end of the RZR in that track mode. When you go up to rock then, this is where we're going to actually bias the ride height up, so we're going to try and give you a little more ground clearance. From a steering assist, we're going to give you the most we can, because we know at low speeds going through the rocks, you want as much assist as you can have. When you get above 15 miles an hour in rock mode, everything kind of defaults back to how comfort is. And the other nice thing is that in the rock mode, there's actually a new feature where it'll lean the RZR into the hill. So like when you're going up, it'll actually drop the front, like the nose down, and it'll kick the back up to try and flatten it out. Yeah, and it'll do it no matter what direction you're going, up, down, you know, or if you have to go at an off angle for like a K-turn or something to turn around, you can do that. And then when you get all the way up into Baja mode, this is going to be kind of a middle of the road power steering feel, but we're actually going to bias the front end to be a little higher. So when you're hitting those big whoops, like you guys might have, like right out of the gate here, coming out on that trail, it's actually going to lift the front end and allow you to kind of scoot right through those big whoops. The other nice thing that we're doing is because we have rebound control now, instead of just dancing and like clipping the tops of the whoops, we can actually drive the tire and let it rebound through and actually hold traction on the ground better. So the easy analogy I like to use is think about like when you were growing up, the guys that were racing BMX bikes, like you always saw guys that would like do this and then guys that would like jump a double, you know, or a tabletop, and like the guy that could like keep the tires on the ground was always faster than the guy that was like looking cool jumping. Well, the same thing happens here. Because we can keep that tire on the earth, on the ground more, you can actually get better traction out of all four wheels and better control out of the steering as well, because it's going to keep the tire on the ground versus skipping off the top of the wheels. So those are the 4 modes. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
And you can literally watch what's going on as you want. There's also 2 other things that we've done software-wise that are upgraded in the Dynamics DV. So if you go back to our previous gen dynamic systems, if you were at a dead stop and you smashed on the throttle, we would actually give you an anti-squat. So we try and stiffen up the back end to keep it flat from kind of sagging down. But we would give you anti-dive anytime you hit the brake, so it stiffens up the front end, right? You guys have probably seen that on your Turbo S's or Pro XPs. Well, now we actually do those things all the time. So as you're driving, we're actually doing anti-dive with the brakes, but we're also doing anti-squat when you're getting on and off the throttle. So as you're, you know, cruising corner to corner and getting back into it, it's going to try and prevent that squat action like real time all the time while you're driving. And the other one that we've got is basically a landing system now, where if you do get the machine airborne when you come down, we actually like this. You'd see a little bit of geometry differences here in kind of this back corner area, but the rest of it looks pretty much the same.
Mainly different because of the articulation of the rear seat.
Yeah.
How we have that pull down, we couldn't use the same thing, so we wanted to maximize as much as we could fit into that pocket, right?
Yeah.
So this is 12, I think it's 12.3 or 12.4 on the 4-seat.
And the 4-seater is already sprung stiffer for 4 passengers and accessories?
Yeah. The PRORs are more set up like we used to, which is they'll have a little ride in. Yeah. So as you add accessories, the Turbo R's are more set up like from factory, where we know we're going to put more weight in them. So the Turbo R's will actually hold their ground clearance better than the Pro R's will a little bit.
Yeah.
But you can, you know, adjust the springs.
But to answer your question, yes, the 4-seaters have stiffer springs than the 2-seaters do. Yeah.
The only difference is here, Turbo R versus Pro R, we don't have the throttle modes, so we don't have the race, rock, sport, throttle mode. It's just the normal, just like Pro XP is. And then the front drive switch is just your standard kind of Turbo S front drive, so it's just on for 4-wheel, on demand, and then down for just your normal 2-wheel drive. Yeah, otherwise same in the interior. You got your tilt telly on Premium and Ultimate, all your steering wheel controls, same shift, you know, park all the way forward, hide all the way back, ride command screen, rocker Fastgate audio. Got your 2 tweeters up front here on the A-pillars with the main speakers right here. Had also mentioned, like on the Turbo R, we did G-wire the rear speakers. So now instead of having to put a speaker harness through the center column transmission with the rear suspension, Turbo R is shorter wheelbase. So you see the Pro XP wheelbase, so 96 on a 2-seat, 125 on a 4-seater. That does give you a shorter trailing arm, so it is a unique trailing arm over the Pro R, but same wheel ends, same radius rods, all that's the same. It's about an inch shorter in travel in the rear versus the Pro R.
Same rear knuckles and everything?
Same rear knuckles, same brakes, everything. Yeah, really it's just the front portion of the trailing arm, so even this rear weldment of the trailing arm is all same from that. So very similar. You got the toe link going through the trailing arm, it's just a shorter one again, so very similar to Pro R there. The big thing on Turbo R for the transmission, we did put a lower low gear in there, so I think they got a Pro XP, you can probably go low gear like 45 miles an hour. Turbo R, you're not even gonna hit 30 low gear, so really geared that low. Get that low speed drivability in the rocks and whatnot. So yeah, otherwise on the engine, I mean, looking at the engine side of things, that's the exact same as Pro XP, same engine, same intake, same exhaust, all that's the same. So a lot of carryover there for Pro XP. Look at that, it'll be a lot smoother.
Transmission's beefier, you guys said?
Same as Pro XP.
Yeah, so
just the lower gears would put into the transmission.
Yeah, so if you compare the Turbo R to the Turbo S, this machine really replaces the Turbo S. So transmission wise, this has got wider gears than the Turbo S, and it's got upgraded bearings in the transmission. And then, like Jared said, it's got the lowest low we've ever put in a RZR. It's like a 35-to-1 in low, roughly. So the shafts are all upgraded as well, you know, much like you see in the Pro R, so bigger bar diameters, upgraded joints, high temp grease. And then, yeah, engine-wise, this has got the liquid-cooled turbo now versus the, you know, the oil-cooled turbo on the Turbo S. So you get the 181 horse. This has also got the vented head. So you get that, you know, you don't get that heat soak like you did on Turbo S. It's gonna purge a lot better. Frankly, both of them actually have that feature, as does the Pro XP. And it acts like you get a really hot day and you're running hard in the dunes. Like you guys may have noticed that you jump out and it almost sounds like a coffee percolator in the back. That's basically what's happening. Is the heat is actually, even though the pump's not running, the heat is still rising and going up into the overflow to purge that even when the engine's off. This one does run a higher flow water pump as well compared to Turbo S or Pro XP. So that's been upgraded for the Turbo R. We've also grown the radiator and low temp core in the front, so that front opening, the fascia, is actually a little bit bigger. So you do get better cooling performance on the Turbo R versus the Turbo S as well. So there's quite a bit actually on the power side that has been upgraded. Clutches, the other thing that we'll be changing on these, there's some stainless inserts, much like I kind of described on the Pro R. The Turbo R will get something similar. The parts are a little different, obviously, because the clutches are different. But that will show up when these things start shipping next spring as well. So the clutches will get an upgrade for that. In a brochure, if you haven't had a chance to see that yet, but it kind of takes you through Sport, Premium, and Ultimate. I think we have another one for the Pro R to the back side of that board. You got your cameras around and snap a picture, because that gives you, the marketing team actually did a nice job kind of laying this out on what you get on everything, and then what you add on when you go up the trims. So if you got questions on that, don't hesitate to ask. But it's very similar to Pro XP, where we've got 3 trims, and then on the Pro R we've got the 2 launch edition colors that will be built and shipped early in production in limited quantity. So Alex, can we pass it over to you to chat accessories a bit?
It'll be quick, yes. So on Pro R, Turbo R, specific to these models, if you think about fitment, they'll start off with that first. It's split into 4 quadrants. So front of the vehicle we talked about is the same between Pro R and Turbo R. So anything forward of the A-pillar will be common from an accessory fitment standpoint. Winches, bumpers, wheels and tires, that'll all be common between Pro R and Turbo R. So any accessories you have for Pro XP won't fit in that specific region. Pat just talked about how the Pro or the Turbo R cage is the same between Pro XP and Turbo R from an aesthetic standpoint. It's also true from an accessory standpoint. So anything that interfaces with the cage on Turbo R or Pro XP will be the same. So windshields, roofs, rear panels, upper doors actually fit on there as well. You get back to the rear of the vehicle, Pro R is unique in the aspect of the bed is 4 inches shallower. So from an aesthetic standpoint, you'll have these same boxes for Pro R, but they'll look a lot different from the depth of them, but they'll still have the same usability with the pivoting spare tire carrier and everything like that. So Turbo R and Pro XP have the same rear accessories with rear bumpers, storage boxes, and that pivoting spare tire carrier. So that's going to be the story there. Anything that the rider would touch while they're riding the vehicle, audio, mirrors, storage bags, those are all common between all 3 of the vehicles. So the cab and cockpit is identical between all of them from an accessory standpoint, and most of the things in there.
Turbo R runs the same on-demand all-wheel drive system that we've had, basically carried forward from the Turbo S. So it's got the extreme duty isolated, so it's hanging on rubber mounts. So this one is still using kind of the overrunning clutch style, where it's about a 3% overdrive, meaning when you're in that all-wheel drive mode, if the rear tires, like the front tires, are moving at the same speed, the front's basically doing nothing, so you get that nice light 2-wheel drive steering feel. And then once the rears start to slip, they basically run at about a 3% faster rate than the fronts do. So that's basically how a Polaris on-demand all-wheel drive system works, is that the rears actually physically spin faster than the fronts all the time. And we've had, I'll say, a host of different ratios over the years depending on the application. So like that XP 1000 that's parked over there is like a 6 to 7% overdrive. A Pro XP and a Turbo R are about a 3% overdrive. When you get into like our Trails and Rocks or our high lifter models, those are like a 0.5%. So they're about as close as you can get to a 1-to-1 with still maintaining that on-demand feature. Where the Pro R is a true 1-to-1, meaning all 4 wheels are spinning at exactly the same speed. Does that answer what you're wondering?
Yes.
Yes.
One more question. With it being more than 1,000 cc's, is it still a UTV? Is that very?
Yeah, so that's going to depend. I mean, what we really ask is work with your local licensing authority because it varies by state. So many states, like, there's not a displacement limit in how they classify the type of vehicles that we sell that RZRs fall into. California, where we're standing right now, is one that is a little bit different in that we fall into the, what is it called? I think it's the off-highway motor vehicle category. It's like the more general categorization. And for our Air Resources Board cert, that's a little bit different on the Pro R as well. Turbo R is basically exactly like a Turbo S in that regard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it really depends on the state and the locality. I'd encourage you, work with whoever your local registration authority is in that regard, because we're not like we don't want to give you bad guidance on that because it does vary depending on where you are in the country.
So state to state, the insurance could be different because it's a different classification of a vehicle?
Could be, yeah. It depends where you are in the world on exactly how you classify it. I'll say the majority of states it will be no different. There are a handful that you may have a different category than you would have had, I'll say, for a Turbo S.
But there's still California models too, and 49 state models?
There are. So the launch editions that you see, like this lime green and red and the black and orange, those ones only come in a 50-state configuration, so every one of them has the EVAP system on them. For all the other Turbo R and Pro R models, whether it's a Sport, a Premium, or an Ultimate, we have both a 49-state and a 50. The difference being the 50-state comes with the evaporative emission system on it.
What's up, guys? Travis Coyne here, back at our El Centro Superstore. A little dusty after our Polaris ride day, but hey, we had a blast out there, and a lot of you guys have been blowing up our social media channels saying, hey, when can I get one? What's the availability, etc. Most of you guys know us from the off-road world. We have 2 Polaris Superstore locations, one in El Centro, California, which is right next door to GLAMIS, as well as one in Banning. Supply is going to be limited, but I'll tell you, I can guarantee you this, we have the largest allocations on the west. So if you want one of these cars, our numbers are listed below. Call the location nearest you to get on our deposit list. And cars are expected to show up early February to mid-March. Again, we'll be having more shipments and more vehicles coming in any other dealership on the west. So don't get stuck on a waiting list. If you want a car, get a hold of our stores today and we'll get you dialed. Hey guys, and by the way, if you want to touch, feel one of these cars in person, we have the Polaris training team coming down here, complete with engineers, on December 8th to our El Centro location. So if you're in the area and you want to touch and feel one of these cars and get to sit in them and see what you think, I highly recommend it. We're one of the very few dealerships in the country that get this opportunity. So don't pass it up and come check these new cars out.